To navigate life as a woman in a demanding world, the first skill is awareness. Just as Medusa's gaze can petrify those who confront her unprepared, your emotional defenses must first recognize threats before they overtake you. Threats are not always dramatic. They are subtle, layered, and often disguised as social expectations, interpersonal pressure, or even your own internalized fears. The ability to identify these triggers early is not reactive weakness, it is strategic strength. Awareness allows you to choose your response rather than be swept away by the flood of emotion. Psychological research demonstrates that chronic exposure to stress and social judgment can distort perception, leaving women more vulnerable to anxiety, emotional fatigue, and reactive decision-making. Recognizing threats requires mindful observation, noticing which interactions, environments, or thought patterns consistently elicit discomfort, irritation, or fear. By naming these triggers, you transform instinctive petrification, your initial freeze or withdrawal, into a conscious signal, a guide for action, rather than an unconscious limitation. Stoicism teaches that external events are neutral. Only our judgments make them distressing. Emotional petrification mirrors this principle. When you sense a social or emotional threat, you feel the first stirrings of defense, the tightening chest, the racing mind, the instinct to retreat. Medusa's archetype shows that these reactions are natural and, if examined, powerful. Instead of shaming yourself for fear or withdrawal, observe it as data, a clear indicator that your boundaries need reinforcement. Practically, this means developing a mental catalog of situations that compromise your emotional stability. For example, recurring criticism from a colleague may trigger defensiveness. Repeated social comparison may provoke anxiety. Recognizing these patterns is akin to Medusa identifying approaching adversaries. The moment you detect the threat, you gain the power to choose, engage, deflect, or withdraw. Each choice becomes a deliberate act of boundary setting, not a passive reaction. Women often face invisible pressures to accommodate others' expectations, masking subtle threats as social niceties. Emotional petrification can manifest as over-anticipation, self-doubt, or avoidance. By consciously labeling these dynamics, you reclaim agency. Ask yourself, is this my responsibility, or is this external pressure I am internalizing unnecessarily? This discernment is the cornerstone of emotional resilience. Establishing clear boundaries begins with internal clarity. Medusa did not act indiscriminately. Her gaze had focus and purpose. Similarly, emotional defense is most effective when guided by intention rather than fear. Begin with small, consistent practices. Pause before responding to emotionally charged messages. Notice your physical reactions to stressful conversations and articulate your needs calmly. These steps train your mind to differentiate between manageable stress and genuine threats that require firm action. Recognizing threats also involves monitoring internal narratives. Negative self-talk, rumination, and catastrophic thinking can amplify perceived dangers. Like Medusa, who transforms perception into reality through her gaze, women can either empower or petrify themselves through the lens of judgment. Cognitive awareness, observing thoughts without immediate reaction, allows you to filter anxiety from actionable insight. The stronger your internal observation, the more precise your boundaries become. Social anxiety often arises when external pressures collide with internal vulnerabilities. Women are conditioned to seek approval, sometimes at the cost of emotional safety. Recognizing the signs, physical tension, intrusive thoughts, avoidance, is the first act of defiance against disempowerment. This awareness is not resignation. It is the initiation of strategic self-protection. Each instance observed is a rehearsal in mastery, turning instinctive petrification into calculated resilience. Implementing these strategies requires daily attention. Journaling emotional triggers, reflecting on social interactions, and rehearsing assertive responses are practical exercises that integrate Stoic and psychological principles. Each moment of awareness strengthens your emotional fortitude, reinforcing the invisible shield that allows you to navigate life with clarity, dignity, and self-respect. Your boundaries become proactive, visible, and honored, not imposed by fear, but by reason. In essence, to be like Medusa in this context is to cultivate an unshakable awareness of the emotional threats that surround you. Recognizing these threats before they break you is the foundation of autonomy. Emotional petrification is transformed from a passive freeze into a strategic alertness, allowing women to engage selectively, preserve their energy, and maintain sovereignty over their inner world. Strength lies not in reacting, but in discerning, observing, and choosing, turning the instinctive stone within into a conscious, empowering shield. Emotional rigidity often develops as an instinctive shield, a psychological petrification in response to repeated stress, criticism, or social pressure. For women, this rigidity can manifest as a resistance to vulnerability, an insistence on controlling outcomes, or a defensive detachment from emotionally charged environments. While society often frames this as coldness or detachment, the truth is that rigidity is a protective mechanism. The challenge is not to eliminate it, but to transform it into intentional strength, a conscious, adaptive armor that serves rather than restricts. Psychologically, emotional rigidity becomes problematic only when it is unconscious or reactive. Automatic defensive patterns can alienate allies, limit emotional growth, and create internal conflict. By cultivating self-awareness, women can convert instinctive petrification into deliberate resilience. This requires reflection, noticing where rigidity arises, understanding its triggers, and choosing how to express or withhold emotional energy strategically. Medusa's archetype reminds us that power lies in the deliberate use of strength, not its mere presence. Stoic philosophy provides a guiding framework for this transformation. The Stoics teach that while external events are outside our control, our responses are within it. Emotional rigidity, when consciously employed, becomes a tool for discerning where engagement is valuable and where withdrawal is protective. Rather than reacting impulsively to provocation or anxiety, women can observe the situation, evaluate its significance, and deploy their energy wisely, like Medusa, focusing her gaze only on threats that require confrontation. Practical exercises support this development. Begin by mapping patterns of emotional resistance. Which situations provoke withdrawal, defensiveness, or numbness? Journaling and reflection help differentiate between harmful rigidity and strategic boundary setting. Over time, this awareness allows for selective engagement, responding assertively when necessary, softening when safe, and holding firm when boundaries are at risk. Strength emerges not from inflexibility, but from conscious application of emotional discernment. Emotional rigidity also provides clarity in social contexts. Women often face conflicting expectations, professional performance, personal relationships, social roles that generate cognitive dissonance. Rigidity, when refined, helps prioritize energy according to values and long-term goals rather than short-term emotional reactions. Medusa's stone gaze symbolizes this clarity, the ability to evaluate a situation objectively, resist manipulation, and maintain autonomy in the face of pressure. Transforming rigidity into strength requires cultivating internal feedback loops. When you notice tension, anxiety, or instinctive withdrawal, pause. Reflect on the underlying cause. Is this fear-based? Is it protecting you from a genuine threat? Or is it a habitual pattern of overreaction? These reflections, guided by Stoic self-inquiry, convert automatic defenses into conscious tools. Emotional rigidity becomes a learned skill rather than a reactive limitation. Women can also employ physical and behavioral practices to reinforce this transformation. Mindful breathing, posture awareness, and intentional pauses before responding strengthen the mind-body connection, supporting controlled emotional expression. When you feel the freeze response, visualize it as a shield that you can wield with precision, rather than as a cage that restricts movement or growth. Communication plays a critical role in converting rigidity into strength. Assertive expression, clear, direct, and respectful, allows boundaries to be enforced without aggression. Medusa's archetype demonstrates that power is most effective when it is deliberate, controlled, and unmistakable. Emotional rigidity, when channeled correctly, empowers women to articulate needs, enforce limits, and protect their psychological space without alienating themselves from relationships or opportunities. Over time, this transformation fosters resilience. Women develop an internal structure that supports both autonomy and connection, balancing emotional defense with adaptability. The stone-like state is no longer a reflexive defense but a conscious posture, vigilant, discerning, and empowered. Anxiety and pressure are no longer paralyzing, they are signals guiding the strategic deployment of energy and focus. In essence, to be like Medusa is to convert instinctive emotional rigidity into conscious strength. It is to recognize that the freeze, the hardening, and the withdrawal are not failures but opportunities for mastery. By observing, reflecting, and acting intentionally, women transform defensive petrification into a protective force that fosters clarity, autonomy, and resilience. The stone becomes a shield, and the shield becomes a symbol of empowerment, an inner armor forged not by fear, but by wisdom, self-respect, and deliberate choice. Setting boundaries is not optional. It is a necessity for women who wish to maintain emotional health and personal integrity. Yet many internalize guilt, social pressure, or the fear of rejection, responding with over-accommodation instead of assertive self-protection. The archetype of Medusa offers a model. She does not apologize for her presence, her gaze, or her boundaries. Women, too, can learn to assert their limits clearly and unapologetically, transforming instinctive defense into empowered autonomy. Psychological research supports this practice. Women often experience boundary fatigue when constantly adapting to others' needs, leaving themselves depleted and vulnerable to anxiety and resentment. Recognizing the importance of self-protection and learning to articulate limits without apology is a critical skill. Emotional petrification, in this context, serves as a signal, a reminder that your boundaries require reinforcement and that you have the power to maintain them consciously. Stoic principles guide this process. Epictetus teaches that what belongs to others is not ours to control. Our focus must remain on our own judgments and actions. When asserting boundaries, women exercise control over their responses, not over others' reactions. The strength lies in clarity and consistency, not in aggression or over-explaining. Medusa's gaze becomes a metaphor. Your awareness and presence are enough to establish your limits without needing external validation. Practical strategies begin with internal clarity. Identify situations where your energy is being compromised or your autonomy challenged. Define what is acceptable and what is not. This might include declining social invitations that drain you, refusing additional responsibilities that threaten your mental space, or disengaging from toxic conversations. Writing these boundaries down reinforces commitment and aids in consistent application. Effective boundary setting also relies on direct, assertive communication. Speak calmly, clearly, and without apology. For instance, saying, "I cannot take on this task today," or "I need time to process before responding," honors your limits without hostility. Medusa's archetype teaches that firmness does not require harshness. Precision and intention are the most powerful forms of defense. Emotional monitoring enhances boundary efficacy. Notice physical and mental signals that indicate stress, discomfort, or intrusion. The instinctive freeze or withdrawal, the petrification, serves as a signal, alerting you to the moment when a boundary must be enacted. By responding intentionally rather than automatically, you reinforce self-respect and cultivate trust in your own judgment. Women often fear confrontation or disappointing others. Stoicism reframes this. The responsibility for your well-being rests solely with you. Others' discomfort is their concern, not a reflection of your value. Assertive boundaries protect your energy and integrity, and over time, they foster respect and healthier relationships. Medusa's archetype embodies this principle. Her power is maintained not by pleasing others, but by holding firm in her truth. Consistency is critical. Boundaries only function if enforced reliably. When women fluctuate between compliance and assertiveness, they create ambiguity, inviting repeated intrusion. By observing patterns, reinforcing limits, and reflecting on outcomes, you transform your instinctive defensive tendencies into reliable, conscious protection. Emotional petrification becomes a tool for strategic clarity rather than a reactive shield. Self-compassion supports boundary maintenance. It is common to feel guilt or second-guess decisions when asserting limits. Medusa's archetype reminds us that protecting oneself is an act of self-respect, not selfishness. Recognize that discomfort, both yours and others, is a natural consequence of authentic boundaries. Over time, these practices reduce anxiety, reinforce emotional sovereignty, and enhance psychological resilience. In essence, to be like Medusa is to assert your boundaries with clarity, confidence, and without apology. Emotional petrification, rather than a source of shame or passivity, becomes a conscious signal to act in alignment with your values and well-being. By observing, reflecting, and asserting, women transform instinctive defense into deliberate empowerment. Boundaries become not just lines of protection but symbols of dignity, strength, and unshakable inner sovereignty. In a world that constantly demands reaction, activity, and validation, stillness becomes a radical act of power. Women are often conditioned to respond immediately to social pressures, emotional triggers, or external expectations, leaving little space for reflection. Medusa's archetype teaches us that stillness is not passivity, it is a conscious stance, a deliberate pause that allows insight, discernment, and strategic action. Emotional petrification, in this sense, is the body's instinctive invitation to observe before reacting. Psychological research emphasizes the importance of mindfulness in emotional regulation. Moments of stillness allow the brain to process stimuli, evaluate threats, and decide on an intentional response. For women navigating anxiety, social pressure, and emotionally intense situations, cultivating stillness transforms instinctive freeze responses into tools of empowerment. Instead of being swept away by fear or expectation, you anchor yourself in observation, clarity, and choice. Stoic philosophy reinforces this principle. Seneca and Epictetus taught that our power lies not in controlling external events, but in mastering our perception and response. The pause, the moment of stillness, is where reason intersects with instinct. Medusa's gaze becomes a metaphor. Her petrifying power arises not from impulsivity, but from measured observation. Likewise, women can harness stillness to evaluate what is truly threatening and what is inconsequential. Practically, stillness can be integrated into daily life through intentional pauses. Before responding to a triggering comment, Waiting a few seconds to breathe and observe your feelings shifts your behavior from reaction to deliberation. In meetings, social interactions, or emotionally charged moments, consciously allowing yourself space to assess the situation strengthens boundaries and reduces reactive stress. The stillness becomes both shield and compass. Women often experience internal conflict when emotions run high. Anxiety, frustration, or pressure can push for immediate action, often reinforcing instinctive petrification or defensive rigidity. Stillness creates a neutral zone where you can differentiate between instinct, fear, and reason. By observing physical sensations, thoughts, and impulses without judgment, you create a foundation for strategic emotional engagement, an empowered form of self-protection. Journaling, reflective meditation, or simple breath awareness exercises are practical tools to cultivate this stillness. The goal is not to suppress emotion, but to transform it into conscious insight. The instinctive freeze, the stone reaction, becomes a signal to slow down, evaluate, and decide. Women who practice this cultivate mental clarity, enhance decision-making, and strengthen emotional sovereignty. In social contexts, stillness allows for strategic engagement. Rather than reacting to criticism, gossip, or peer pressure, women can observe dynamics, interpret motivations, and choose when and how to respond. Medusa's archetype exemplifies this selective focus. She engages with precision, never indiscriminately. Similarly, women gain agency by controlling the timing, intensity, and method of their interactions. Physical cues enhance this practice. Maintaining upright posture, steady breathing, and controlled eye contact reinforces mental calm and presence. The body's alignment supports emotional regulation, transforming defensive petrification into poised confidence. This embodiment of stillness signals internal clarity to others and strengthens the sense of inner control. Reflection on past reactions also enhances clarity. By examining moments when emotional impulses led to regret or boundary compromise, women can identify patterns and integrate lessons into future behavior. Stillness becomes a tool for continuous self-improvement, turning instinctive petrification into a disciplined practice of resilience and strategic empowerment. Ultimately, to be like Medusa is to master the art of stillness. Emotional petrification is reframed as an opportunity to pause, observe, and act with intention. Women learn to filter distractions, recognize genuine threats, and deploy energy strategically. Stillness is no longer passive. It is a deliberate stance of power, a conscious shield, and a method of cultivating clarity, autonomy, and inner strength that guides every action with wisdom and purpose. Anxiety is often framed as a weakness or a problem to be eliminated. Yet it is an evolutionary signal, a form of internal alert that danger or uncertainty is present. For women, chronic anxiety is amplified by social expectations, performance pressures, and the persistent need to anticipate others' judgments. Medusa's archetype provides a model. The stone gaze immobilizes threats, but in human terms, anxiety can be converted from paralyzing fear into intentional, focused action. Recognizing this potential is the first step toward empowerment. Psychological research demonstrates that anxiety signals opportunity for problem-solving and boundary reinforcement. When you feel the tightening in your chest or racing in your mind, it is not merely discomfort, it is data. Emotional petrification, that instinctive freeze, is the body's way of saying, pause, evaluate, prepare. Women who learn to interpret anxiety as a signal rather than a limitation harness it to strengthen boundaries, clarify priorities, and make deliberate choices. Stoicism reinforces this perspective. Marcus Aurelius emphasized that our judgment shapes our experience. Anxiety does not exist in a vacuum. It is our interpretation of potential threats that amplifies it. Medusa's metaphorical gaze teaches that observation precedes action. The freeze is not weakness, it is awareness. By intentionally framing anxiety as a signal, women can shift from reactionary paralysis to proactive engagement, using insight to guide strategic steps. Practically, converting anxiety into action begins with assessment. Ask, what am I truly concerned about? Is this a genuine threat or imagined expectation? Journaling, reflection, and even voice recording can help externalize anxious thoughts, providing clarity and control. By separating perception from reality, the petrified instinct transforms into a tool for decisive, empowered action. Structuring responses is the next step. Anxiety is energy physiological arousal that, when harnessed, can fuel focused problem solving. Women can channel racing thoughts into structured plans, breaking overwhelming tasks into manageable steps, preparing for conversations with assertive clarity, or setting explicit limits to protect time and emotional space. Medusa's gaze symbolizes this precision, energy directed intentionally rather than scattered chaotically. Emotional regulation is critical. Breathing techniques, mindful observation, and brief pauses reduce the intensity of anxious reactions. The momentary freeze becomes a strategic reset, allowing women to evaluate options rather than act impulsively. This aligns with Stoic practice, observing internal responses without being controlled by them. The petrification is no longer passive. It becomes a deliberate pause, a shield for clarity and intentionality. Socially, converting anxiety into action empowers communication. Women can express concerns, set boundaries, and negotiate expectations calmly and decisively. For example, anxiety about an overcommitted schedule can lead to direct refusal of additional tasks, assertive prioritization, or delegation. By turning nervous energy into measured responses, emotional petrification becomes a tool for influence, autonomy, and respect. Reflecting on past anxious experiences consolidates learning. Women can identify patterns where fear previously led to reactive or avoidant behaviors. With Medusa's archetype in mind, these moments of petrification are reframed as alerts that guide smarter, boundary-protective decisions. Each intentional action reinforces confidence, reducing future anxiety and strengthening self-trust. Daily practices reinforce this skill. Morning reflection, structured planning, and evening journaling create feedback loops that convert instinctive stress signals into actionable intelligence. Over time, the habitual petrification response shifts from passive immobilization to proactive empowerment. Anxiety no longer dictates your behavior, it informs, directs, and strengthens it. In essence, to be like Medusa is to transform anxiety from immobilizing fear into deliberate, boundary-affirming action. Emotional petrification is not weakness. It is a natural alert system, a precursor to insight and agency. Women who master this process cultivate resilience, clarity, and strategic presence. Like Medusa, they turn the instinctive stone into a conscious, empowering tool anchoring their energy, protecting their boundaries and acting with precision, confidence, and unwavering inner strength. Emotional petrification, when understood and harnessed, is not a sign of weakness but a blueprint for empowerment. The instinctive freeze, the tightening chest, the desire to withdraw, these are signals that your boundaries need reinforcement and that your energy must be protected. Women who embrace the lessons of Medusa's archetype learn to recognize these alerts, reflect upon them, and convert them into deliberate action. Strength emerges not from constant activity, but from conscious observation, intentional response, and unwavering self-respect. By integrating principles from psychology and Stoicism, women can transform instinctive rigidity into conscious resilience. Awareness of emotional triggers, assertive boundary setting without apology, and the disciplined use of stillness allow for clarity, autonomy, and inner peace. Anxiety becomes a tool for insight, social pressure a stage for strategic engagement, and solitude a source of reflection and renewal. Each element of petrification, once a reactive defense, becomes a deliberate mechanism of protection and empowerment. To be like Medusa is to claim your emotional sovereignty fully. It is to transform fear into discernment, rigidity into strength, and withdrawal into intentional presence. It is a practice of living unapologetically with clarity, dignity, and self-mastery. By observing, reflecting, and acting consciously, women turn the stone within into a shield that honors their values, preserves their energy, and asserts their rightful space in the world. Strength, after all, is not measured by the absence of threat, but by the mastery of one's response to it.